Good evening, America. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Welcome into Classic Wax, brought to you by the Beat Sessions. I'm your host, Mitchell Weary. Thank you for joining me on the special, first edition of this new turn. We started off with a morning show. Now we got an evening show. Just working out better with my schedule in my new job. But wherever you are, thanks for tuning in and checking things out tonight. We are looking at a phenomenal record from a phenomenal artist, Jeff Lynne, the head frontman of Electric Light Orchestra. And this record, a new world record, released on October 15th, 1976. Very excited to focus on this album tonight. One of my favorites, just banger after banger from start to finish. Really is it's very exciting to have this be the record of the week. If you're familiar, or if you're not familiar with the show, I should say, this is something that I've been wanting to do for a while now, and getting a lot of people asking for classic album reviews. So here we are doing this, but I usually like to contextualize it with reviews that I've done throughout the week and also with a news story. So it's fun to kind of tie that all together in the end with our album of the week. And hopefully you see the continuity there. And if not, feel free to call me out, give me shit. It is all good. I want to encourage all of you to please contribute, throw down in the chat. Don't be shy about super chatting as well. Appreciate that. Anything that helps me grow this channel and improve it through the course of 2024 and into the future is certainly appreciated. And I just thank you all for click and play and tuning in from time to time. If that's the least that you can do, it still means a ton to me, and I appreciate all of you. I do want to lead things off this week, though, with an interesting article that I saw on Pitchfork, which you guys know that I like to rag on them a little bit from time to time. It's not my favorite music publication. Some of the angles are, I don't necessarily agree with everything that they have to throw down from time to time. But this particular record was interesting, written by Philip Sherburne, who's, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, but researching him, he's an interesting cat. He's been a writer, contributor to this publication and a number of other publications for about 2 decades now. A DJ as well. He's well-traveled. He's DJ'd all over the world. And so he has a really interesting perspective on electronic music. And, talking about Rufus Du Sol this week, great band out of Australia. This felt appropriate to kind of lead things off with. His title on this piece that he's put out, it's time for electronic music to turn its dreams into reality. And subtitle says, after the pandemic decimated dance floors worldwide, electronic music seeks a new way forward. Now, he brings up a number of interesting points. I love the history that he gets into as far as electronic music, the way that marginalized groups throughout the decades have utilized, what is a genre that has ultimately existed within a lot of subcultures. I feel like electronic music really didn't blow up and become commercially viable until recently. I'd say within the last two and a half decades or so. And so I appreciate his perspective as far as the growth of this genre and what it offers. I felt like this article, it ended a little empty. I felt like he never really came to a conclusion. It felt like, he was trying to steer things and the conversation in general towards the idea that there's this sense of vapidness to electronic music, that it's more about being in the club, being, in whatever party scene you're in and enjoying the moment and not really thinking outside of that, thinking about the bigger world picture, so to speak. Excuse me. And what I'd argue, with this article is that I think that electronic music, and talking about it with Rufus Du Sol, the whole idea is to escape, is to find that other world, that ethereal sense of being, stepping outside of ourselves. And I think it's amazing to be able to do that in an environment with multiple different people. And that's always been the favorite thing about live music in general. It's like no matter where you're at, for the most part, there are certain genres and subgenres that, I will not go out of my way to partake in any of those shows for obvious reasons. But I know that every show that I've ever been to, I feel like I've seen just a great mix of people coming from different backgrounds, different places, and coming together to celebrate a common goal. And it's not just electronic music, as I said. It is music as a whole. That is the purpose of it, to bring us together. And I think that that's the biggest thing that made COVID, and he talks about it in this article, so difficult in general, is that we were denied that experience. A big part of why we like to go out and why we like to interact was cut off from us. And he argues that, moving forward with electronic music, it needs to find more of a purpose, more of a sense of value. And I would disagree. I think that what you're getting with electronic music, especially, you have logistics that come into play as far as it's much easier to get one person with their DJ rig to move around and set a nightclub off versus the logistics of touring with the whole band. You have guys that, can seriously fly from time zone to time zone and play, multiple gigs in different parts of the world in a single night for that reason. And it's an amazing thing to watch artists do it. I can't imagine how exhausting it would be to do that on a regular basis, but I applaud those that make the effort and are just, that are wanted that much throughout the world, that they can seriously pick up and start in New York in a night, be in Chicago, be in LA, or, given other parts of the world where you're closer proximity. You could start off in Eastern Europe DJing a club somewhere and, end up in Spain by the end of the night or the morning, depending on how you like to party. I know that they like to party pretty late there to the sunrises. It's a fun place to get involved in the club scene. But I think that overall, the most frustrating thing that I disagree with in this article is that I don't think that electronic music and artists need to go out of their way any further to assign themselves to some type of political perspective. And I argue this on the channel all the time. I think there's nothing less rock and roll than, promoting a candidate, especially in America with our political parties. You got the two sides, and endorsing political candidates, again, there's nothing less rock and roll. But I think that by being in different spots all throughout the world, playing unique music, tying together so many different sounds and genres, making that effort to assimilate all these sounds and to connect with such diverse audiences is enough for me, in my opinion. And I think that many of us coming off of that COVID experience, as polarizing and as political as it was, the whole thing was so overly politicized. It's nice to have that breath of fresh air. It's nice to be removed from that situation and to be back in some level of normalcy. And I know that the world is difficult right now. There's multiple conflicts that are going on, and those, again, are very polarizing as well. But I think for the most part, your average person is wanting to transcend that polarization. And if electronic music and these artists, through tying together all these unique genres and pushing the genre itself forward in new directions. This article hits off with the story about this guy having a dream about an imaginary genre called Hit 'em. And it's interesting listening to it. It's very crunchy. It's in 5/4 timing. It reminds me of just the shock that I felt the first time I heard a dubstep song, which I'm not a big fan of that particular pocket of electronic music. But if you're into it, I totally get it. It's almost kind of like the punk rock, heavy metal of electronic music, in my opinion. So, with regards to this article, I'd say there's a lot that Philip brings to the table. I'm going to post the link in the episode afterwards, and I'd encourage all of you to read it. There's a lot of cool information there as far as just history and the backdrops on certain genres, starting points, so to speak, if you will. But I think overall that electronic music doesn't need to do more. I think that blending all these different world sounds and coming up with different timing structures and just creating different sounds that are shocking is enough to unite us in a world where, even mentioning politics sometimes can be contentious and, ruin the mood in what could, be just a very peaceful and exciting venue. We don't want to do that. We want to keep things upbeat. Turning down the beat a little bit, I hate to go to a negative place in the show, but need to start with The Offspring. Talking about a band that used to blend genres very well and that used to be very political and in an eloquent fashion. I always really appreciated Dexter Holland's perspective as far as looking at the negativity of the world, but writing in a way that shows that if we come together, if we ignore the precedent that has been set before us and steer the world in a different direction, then we can overcome things. And it's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a difficult thing to do. The weight of the world is on our shoulders with this. It's a quote from one of their songs. It's oftentimes it's difficult, and we feel slighted, and and especially this newer generation, I would feel, coming off of COVID. The world hasn't been fair to them, and that's frustrating to deal with. It reminds me a lot of the Spanish flu, and then a decade later, you're going into the Great Depression. I couldn't imagine being alive at that time in America and having to deal with that. But that generation overcame. There's a reason that they are called the Great Generation. And I think that we are in a time and place right now where, we have to take that weight on our shoulders and just be better. It's all that we can do. And I feel that sentiment in a lot of people that I interact with and speak with, whether our politics line up or whether they're different. I think at the end of the day, so many people that I've spoken to throughout the last 4 or 5 years ultimately just want to find some type of level ground where we can constructively move, our country specifically, but the entire world forward, make progress, make things better for the entire human race. And I'm tired of thinking and hearing that is some type of like pipe dream. I think it's very feasible to do, but I think that it's going to require a lot of selflessness on all of our behalf. Dexter Holland is a great cat. I mean, he's a very insightful dude, incredibly smart. Molecular biology, he's got a PhD in that. He started studying way back in the 90s when the Offspring was doing their thing, and when they blew up, he put his education on the side. He's an amazing philanthropist, just a downright solid human being, really nice dude. I probably won't ever get the chance to talk to him after the review that I just put out earlier, but it's just my opinion, and it's just a small angle of the opinion that I have about him, which really is very positive. I think that he has been a force for good, not just in music, but in the world. And this new Offspring record, there's little pieces that I think might remind you of the band, and to each their own. You might even dig this record, and that is totally cool. I would love to hear a difference of opinion on that review. This is not an echo chamber. I don't expect all of you to show up just to applaud me and to agree with me. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this record, if you're digging it, if you aren't. Dexter Holland, Noodles, the crew, I think for the most part, they've left an indelible footprint on the music world. But this album, I think that the world could probably live without this contribution. And you just knowing that they're still out there touring and putting on live shows, their live show is amazing. I'm probably going to go buy a beer or join a friend smoking a cigarette when I hear any of these new songs, if I choose to go see a new show. But if they're still out there playing songs off Ignition, playing songs off Smash, X-Nay and the Hombre and Americana, that ticket price is totally worth it. Very high energy shows. Getting back to our starting point though, fantastic record from Australian group Rufus Du Sol put out this week. Inhale, Exhale really finds these guys hitting an interesting stride in their career. If you're familiar with the band, starting off for like the first decade and a half that they were together, this is an outfit, the three of them pretty much spent all their time together, bouncing around between different cities, getting different inspiration from those places for certain projects. But, they've gotten older. And I know that Tyrone has a family now, and wanting to raise that family and wanting to create some separation. I feel like that's given them the opportunity to find themselves as individuals, and coming back together and working in a different light, I think has given them a very interesting creative power, a very interesting dynamic together. They talked about a regiment when they would come together for certain pockets. It's like 2-week pockets at a time. They were in LA, in Austin, and in Ibiza throughout the course of this project, putting it together. And I think that this record, you're feeling that perspective. You're feeling a different, unique energy, them trying to do something new. Posts in the comments have been fascinating. A lot of people really dig this project. There have been a few people that don't quite feel the energy of it. But what I would say is that you have an outfit that, first of all, functions in many ways like a rock and roll band. So I've always argued with these guys that they make albums. They very consciously are not trying to put together just simple, ephemeral, dance-oriented tracks. These are records that I think, I listen to their older stuff and I think it's aged incredibly well, especially Inner Bloom. I mean, Inner Bloom is such a brilliant record. But as the decades go on, I think that these are these are records that I'm always going to continue to listen to. And it's one of the things that Philip brought up in that article that I mentioned earlier. He talked about the shift in electronic music and how the ambient side of electronic music has really taken hold for a lot of people. If you look at the numbers in streaming, it's pretty remarkable how much that's skyrocketed. People realizing and talking about that unity. It's not just about partying and being in the moment. There's that element of escapism, and having that more ambiently driven electronic music. It's not just escaping, in my opinion. I really think that there's a meditative quality in a lot of ways to what bands like Rufus Du Sol and these more ambient outfits are bringing to the table. I also love the fact that, given they function like a rock and roll band, these songs can be remixed in any way, shape, or form, whether these guys decide to do it or other DJs. So that's exciting as well, knowing that you have the original versions of these tracks, but you have great instrumentation, great melodies, just great compositions that are capable of becoming full-on dance floor bangers. And I think that's super cool. This is a phenomenal effort from a phenomenal band. And if you haven't checked out Rufus Du Sol's Inhale Exhale, definitely give it a go before the end of the week. Which leads us into our album of the week, a new world record from Electric Light Orchestra, released on October 15th, 1976. Jeff Lynne, one of my favorites. I argue he might be very overlooked. I feel like when I talk about my new roommate and I, we were just talking about the Traveling Wilburys. And it was funny, Jeff Lynne was like the first one that he mentioned, which is very rare. I very rarely hear people throw his name down first. It's usually Tom Petty, then Bob Dylan, then Roy Orbison, and then you got George Harrison. And anytime the conversation comes up, it's like, who's that fifth one? Who's that fifth guy? Jeff Lynne, outstanding voice. Conceptually, this outfit, trying to bring together rock and roll and classical music. Going back and reading old reviews, this was such a brand new sound, bringing two very unique, different things together. And I think a lot of people, for their first few records, were hesitant to see if this project itself would ever reach, any type of fruition where, this is exactly what Jeff has been wanting to realize throughout the years. And I would argue that A New World Record is that album. Some of you might say that Out of the Blue is that record. I mean, a really great double record. It is fantastic in its own right. I love it. I absolutely love that record. But what I dig about A New World Record, couple things. It's the first time that we get that signature ELO logo on an album cover from Kosh, so I think that's pretty cool. That's one of the most identifiable logos I think I've ever seen throughout popular music. I mean, the moment that you see those letters, you know exactly what band is being talked about. But I think that this record, being the vinyl purist that I am, 36 minutes, 9 songs, it is so cohesive. It comes together so incredibly well. There's not a minute of filler on this thing. Every second of it is worth listening to. And, we talk about it on the channel. If it's going to go on the shelf, you got to be able to drop the needle and listen to it from start to finish. And so this particular record, just full of bangers. Tightrope, Telephone Line, So Fine, Living Thing. Do Ya is definitely the most rock and roll driven track on this record. It's one of my favorite rock and roll songs, but I'm not going to say it's my favorite song on this particular record, because as far as the compositions and the unique quality that they have, there's so many moments where you're watching this shift between, a dominance in the rock and roll element and then back to that classical element. And that's a difficult thing to do. And as nuanced and as brilliant as it is, there are few people out there that I think that could have pulled a project off like this. And it really is part of what makes a guy like Jeff Lynne so brilliant. This record, we'll get into the track list right now. It is going to kick off with Tightrope. And you got that slow electric fade in, those ominous, moody strings that are so recognizable right off the bat. And they become really frenzied. That backing vocal comes in. And then the drum roll ushers in this funky rock and roll track, Bright Vocal, which is one of my favorite things about it. Jeff's voice is just stunning on this record. And he even talks about it too. He's the first to admit that I think the peak of my songwriting was realized on this record. And I couldn't agree with him more. But Tightrope, you got those bright vocal melodies and the harmonies. And I love just that back and forth shift is, as I was talking about before, between the rock and roll element and the orchestration, just really nice textures. The strings are not always present. They definitely play a kind of like an intermittent role in pretty much all of these compositions, but just done so brilliantly. Telephone Line is your second track. You get that slow electro phone-like intro, the piano, the sound of a telephone ringing. You got that lo-fi vocal that complements the piano production. And I love the way it just shifts out of that so beautifully. Has this classic piano-driven pop feel, beautiful strings work in and out, and just what a pre-chorus and chorus. It's so big as far as the vocal melody that's there. And again, that recognizable quality easily makes this one of the best signature songs in this band's catalog, and it arguably is one of the best songs on the record. Rockaria is your third track. You got this operatic female vocal that opens up. The strings, it's going to usher in this bluesy rocker. I really like the drive on this song. It's one of the shorter tracks on the record, coming in at 3 minutes and 12 seconds. It's actually Above the Clouds is the shortest, but Rockaria is the second shortest track on this record. Just a hot number. I love that blues influence, as I said, piano and strings that complement that to create a light rock and roll sound. But the breakdown, I love the operatic element. You get this, it's all done in German. And this record it was recorded in Munich. So, and it's interesting, getting into a little side note here before we get back to the track list. This is the first record from them to really blow up in their home UK. And that's startling to me. It took 6 albums for them to have a breakthrough in the United Kingdom and basically in the United States as well. And again, this is a genre, a pocket of rock and roll music that there's many critics that talked about. Pretty ballsy of you to think that you could do something like this and have it be popular in America at that time. I mean, you have so many different things going on as far as rock and roll, and even just like disco and funk, and so many different genres taking hold. This is kind of a weird pocket genre, and in a country where stuff like that doesn't really take off. It's one of the things that I really appreciated about that article from Philip is, he talks about how America is a difficult place because, you can't really do that in this country. Oftentimes you have to find a different market, a different country basically to, take off, to let your sound do its thing and grow. So for this band to be able to realize that with this record truly is exceptional. And I love that. And then I love that they were able to do that with this record. Rockaria. Yes. Finish up with that. Your fourth track going to close out side one is Mission, a World Record. And you get the sci-fi electro intro that fades in. Simple piano and vocal open up with the other effects. I love the build-in and the textures and the drums that get ushered in. It's got this smooth orchestration. The rhythm takes a funny turn as the song progresses, and I like the shift. Again, that's one of the great things about these compositions, the back and forth. It's going to mellow and return to that string drive, but then it works back to the funk, and then it turns to a big coda, and you get this really interesting electronic element in the vocals. The guitar is really fascinating. Just a phenomenal way to close out the A side of this record. What's up, Brian King? Yes, his voice helped blend all the others in their albums. I couldn't agree with you more. Thanks for showing up, buddy. So Fine is going to kick off the B-side on this thing. It's got a vocal intro, ushers in a driving piano and rhythm, takes that breezy kind of 70s rock alt feel. This track is unique in this run of songs for that reason, I'd argue. Really nice backing strings, big world percussion in this breakdown that it's one of my favorite parts of the song. The strings join brilliantly. You get a little bit of disco guitar that's going to back that up. It's a fun song that draws on a lot of fun influences. Living Thing is your sixth song. I think pretty much all of us have heard this track. Those swelling strings with that kind of Spanish Mediterranean influence that starts off. It's going to shift to a mid-tempo rock and roll track with big vocal melodies. The chorus is going to find this rock and groove, and big vocal with sparse strings is a nice part of the song. And I like that it returns back to that Mediterranean style open, and then a return to what is going to dominate the rest of the song structure, again with that mid-tempo rock and roll feel. Above the Clouds is your 7th song, shortest track on this record. Has really got gorgeous, moody strings to open up with. I love the vocal that's there as well. Shifts to this bright piano-driven track. You get this jumpy bow technique that dominates the strings and these sci-fi textures, world percussion that's working in. This is a band that, not just rock and roll and classical music, but that's the whole point of this show tonight. It's artists who have really made a conscientious effort to draw on all the different music of the world and bring it together. And, who needs to talk politics when you're already just showing that unity and all of that in the songs that you're bringing together, letting the compositions speak for themselves. Your penultimate track, Do Ya? One of my favorite rock and roll songs, as I've stated, opens with that big recognizable riff. And I like the role of the strings in this particular song. They take a back seat, but they complement. They're still very nuanced and lovely. And when they do show up, it has a big impact on this track, especially when they swell towards the I, and it's like they're swelling, and then it gets right back into that rock and roll. Just one of my favorite vocals from Jeff. Super great song. And it's going to lead into your album closer, Shangri-La. Your 9th track opens with this psychedelic 50s pop doo-wop feel. It's got mid-tempo piano, simple rhythm and harmonies work in with light string textures that take hold at the right moment. And I would say again that it's the best thing about when you see the influence of the strings is from a production standpoint, from a writing standpoint, they just hit at the right moments on all of these compositions. This record, super outstanding. I was very thrilled to come across this and to be able to talk about it on this splendid Tuesday night, October 15th, 2024. I hope you enjoyed this record this week, and I hope you enjoyed the show and all the content that we were able to discuss. Please tune in next Tuesday night for your next feature. I will always try to drop that about an hour or two before we get into the show, so you have a little insight, little ideas to whether you want to watch the show or not. I get that not every record that comes up is going to be a channel favorite, but I can't see anybody in the community not enjoying this record. So tear through this thing. If you got it on wax, throw it on the table, drop the needle, and until next time, we will see you on Classic Wax.